focus is bringing Pakistani contemporary art into public institutions and public spaces. So I have an exhibition up, not to toot my own horn, but I'll just say it anyway, at the Plaza Theatre for the Lahore Biennale. So do go and check it out after this. And here I'm joined by Jonathan Jones, who is an eminent art critic based in London. He writes for The Guardian. He is also a judge for the Turner Prize and is incidentally also interviewing Waqas Khan a little later today, so that should be an interesting conversation. And next to Jonathan is Alexandre Colliex, who is the former head of international programming for the Centre Pompidou. And Alexandre is now running a very interesting program, which he's going to talk to us a little bit about, based in Paris. So I think we might start with that. Our conversation is about art in public spaces. And Lahore as a city, obviously, is filled with beautiful public architecture, public spaces, and with festivals like the Lahore Literature Festival, the Lahore Biennale. A lot of art is being shown and seen by the general public, which is exciting. But there are other cities that have done it exceptionally well as well, like London, like Paris, and it would be wonderful to hear about how these two wonderful gentlemen see public art moving forward and what exciting developments are taking place. So Alexandre, would you like to start a little bit?
Thank you very much for this introduction. Yes, I'm very excited that we can have this exchange and this dialogue on how Paris and London have been thinking and implementing and dreaming of public art. And in this case, I think Paris is following in the footsteps of London with this project that I wanted to...
Don't go too far in that.
We have this project that will be changing literally the geography of Paris also through the arts. And it's a major, probably the largest public art project in our generation in France. The incentive was really the Olympics. Paris will have the Olympics in 24 now. And my company now, I had a company that's called Manifesto. We are very much involved with this. This is the map of Paris. In the center, you saw the little highlighter with the Eiffel Tower. This is Paris today, as it is today. So by the time we open the Olympics in 4 years and beyond, what you have around are the new metro lines that are being built in Paris. So it's literally doubling, for those of you who've been in Paris, we are now doubling the number of the metro lines and the size of Paris, and building 68, I mean, this is crazy, 68 stations, metro stations. And what is, I think, kind of original in this project is that for each of those stations, from the start they said, okay, we're going to work with major international architects, like Kengo Kuma, Pritzker Prize winners, for each of those metro stations. And make sure that the architect is married with an artist, with established artist or younger generation of artists. But and so that the art, the public art, that's I think and I will show a few images to start with. The public art here is not something that down the road, when the building is complete or the station has been opened, and say, oh, there's this blank wall here. What could we put? Let's invite an artist. No. We are, from the beginning, the architects and the construction process includes a major art installation, that's architectural in ambition, in size, etc. And also, that's an interesting point. It means that the cost of the art project is right from the start embedded or included or in the with the concrete that they're pouring, right? So that's I think an interesting way of looking at things. And so this is perhaps as a to kick off our conversation, the one thing that I wanted to mention, and it has obviously repercussions in the way that the center of the city will be will interact with what we call the banlieue, so the less these areas around the city center that are at a disadvantage. This is in one of those 68 stations. We are looking at a piece by Grasso. The whole station, the point of metro station is that they are massive and going, very far. They are sort of vertical, but underground. And he'll be creating a sort of Piero della Francesca trompe-l'œil of the size of the station, so that when you are, 40 meters underground, you'll think you are looking at a Piero della Francesca sky of Tuscany, if you will. This type of projects, I've got a few others, but I'd really like to, perhaps, this is my kickoff.
I think Paris and London are quite different cities. A few years ago, I was writing an article about a big article about Paris, and which meant I was almost commuting, and I had I was regularly going to Paris. And one day I'd been in Paris, I came back to London, was walking along the South Bank to where Tate Modern is, and looking at all the skyscrapers that we have, and I'm thinking, what an ugly city I live in, what a terrible, ugly city compared to Paris. So I wouldn't recommend being too much like London, aesthetically anyway. But London, Britain, has never, in the last 20 years or so, Britain has had a huge explosion of public art, of many varieties. We had The Angel of the North, which was created by Anthony Gormley, which is a giant winged steel statue towering over Gateshead in the northeast of England, Gateshead was a city that wasn't on the map at all, really. It was a declining industrial city. And this Angel of the North is kind of, we capture a lot of people's imagination. You see it from the train or the car when you're going, north. So that was an example of how a work of public art could kind of redefine a place and can give it identity. And we've had many other projects, but we've also had controversies about public art. And these are all kinds of different. The public art could be controversial for lots of reasons. It can be, if you have a very sort of modern, iconoclastic work of art, that can upset people. The famous example of that in Britain, it was the work of art entitled House by Rachel Whiteread, which was a cast. She filled an entire house with concrete, and then knocked away the outside. So what you had was the kind of concrete ghost of the house. So you had this grey, this grey block, but which was marked with the staircases and the windows. So it really was a ghostly presence, and that was in East London. But that was, a lot of people hated it. A lot of people loved it. It got the Turner Prize. It was one of the kinds of things that made the British contemporary art scene much better known than it ever had been before, because of these kinds of rows that we were having. And that was demolished. And that's happened to other works of art too. Richard Serra, back in the 1980s, Richard Serra in New York, great modern sculptor, created a piece called Tilted Arc, which was very controversial and was destroyed. So in some ways, I think the most interesting contemporary art is often the contemporary art, public art. The thing about public art is you have an artist and you have the public. So do you want the artist to produce something which the public will like, and which is going to, to put their art to a sort of function, like enlivening a metro station or beautifying a metro station, or do you want them to express themselves? Personally, I would, the best art comes from the soul, and so I suppose the ideal work of public art would be somebody whose soul makes them do something which is somehow very universal and accessible at the same time. So you want people who are very good at communicating. I think we're all surrounded by public art. That certainly, in Britain there are, and I'm sure here as well, there are statues, there are things which are just taken for granted. Another controversy we have around public art is just very bad works of art which have been commissioned because it's been so fashionable in Britain. Basically, we got to the point where cities and councils would commission anything, really, so long as it was big and and they thought it would rebrand the city and create, bring interest. So we've had terrible statues of footballers, things which are just sort of ugly, things which are boring, things which are stupid. We have in Trafalgar Square in the heart of London. The centre of it is a statue of Nelson's Column, one of the most famous landmarks in London. And then there are 4 plinths which date from the 19th century, and 3 of the plinths have equestrian statues, but one was left blank, and no one could because they could never decide whose statue should go on it. So it's just an empty plinth. And so that has become a venue for public art, and there's been a whole series of artworks there. Perhaps the most famous was the artist Mark Quinn did a marble statue of Alison Lapper, a disabled woman. This was considered very sort of, to put a big image of a disabled person right in the middle of London. This was seen as a kind of important gesture, and that was then they later did a kind of version of it at the Olympics. But we've also had interesting things where what about art that engages people, not a monument? Should contemporary art be a monument, or should it kind of involve lots of people? So we have there's an artist called Jeremy Deller who's created kind of huge actions, almost like plays, which involve a lot of people. So that's another approach. But anyway, just
sort of on that note, I wanted to ask you, what do you think the role of the city council or the government is then to kind of control the kind of art that's being shown, to make sure that it is, because as you said, artists can often express themselves and also antagonize the public. So if a work of art is being built for the public, what do you think the role?
Well, I think artists should antagonize the public. I think public art, if public art doesn't antagonize, I really, if it's not antagonizing people or stirring people up a bit, then really it's just decoration.
You've been making several extremely crucial points about public art. The first being, you're using the example of Gateshead, this huge angel, if you will, that transformed a city, that changed the perception of a city. Your question about, what drives the local council or authorities to, create such an important work.
I should have mentioned that I actually hate the Angel of the North.
No,
because it's interesting. The more, it's kind of, I think it's quite banal, and people can sort of put their own meaning into it. But then maybe.
But I guess it's true how an artwork, as you mentioned, can completely change the outlook of a city or change what the city is known for. Mm-hmm. So you mentioned how that city was completely revived, and from what I understand, that's what the Paris metro station project will also do for the Banlieues, which have historically been quite underprivileged, ignored.
No, I think that's a very good point here. They are using, it's always, and you really describe this about politics. How do you, how you antagonize or not, but the idea behind those massive art projects is really to, let's say, change a geography, if you will. All the great monuments that you were describing are in the very center of Paris. If you travel to Paris, you'll want to go to the Louvre, along the Seine River, go to all the great monuments. So that's how public art has a role in the city, because it brings and drags people to here. The idea behind this massive project is really that tomorrow's monuments, tomorrow's heritage sites will be not in the center of Paris, but all around Paris. Remember the map I showed you? It's really to build, let's say, a collection. And the word they are using to describe those projects, 68 major works of art, are to create a collection of public art on the outskirts for those underprivileged areas, so that people will travel to the place, will relate to the place, will be proud of their, of their place. And definitely using the term of collection. Not, open air, but, underground collection of art.
I think we have to wrap up soon, but I did want to bring us back to Lahore as a city, because I know that there's been quite a controversial project that's been happening here, which is the Orange Line, where a metro line was being built, and a lot of very important historical monuments were being endangered. And I think it was only when intellectuals, people passionate about Lahore and passionate about its architecture and its heritage stood up and protested, that the government actually thought, oh, actually, whoops, we made a bit of a mistake. We should bring in urban planners and figure out how to preserve our city. So it's not just about new contemporary artworks, it's also about preserving existing public art. And I know that even in Lahore, I don't know how much you both have traveled around the city, but you must see the Aga Khan Foundation and the Lahore authorities are fixing, well, not fixing, but kind of preserving the fort, for example, which has the largest picture gallery in the world. And the old city is also an interesting project where the Shahi Hammam is being preserved and conserved over time. And the city is being opened up again to its general public. So what do you think about a project like that, where historical sites are finally being revitalized again? And how can that kind of, well, not that there should be a choice, but do you think cities should also be focusing on creating new public art projects, or first dealing with what they already have and they've been gifted with?
Well, the Lahore Biennale in the fort is a very good example of, how public art, art being displayed in public space, can revitalize or drag, interest and to heritage sites, clearly. I mean, having contemporary art in all, castles or fortresses.
I'm very, yes, I only arrived in Lahore at 2 o'clock in the morning last night, so I can't really claim to know the city in any way at all yet. Although that's not going to stop me commenting on it. And I did look at Rudyard Kipling's novel Kim, which begins in Lahore, and it begins, the first paragraph of it is actually about public art and how it's used. It starts with Kim sitting astride a cannon outside the museum in Lahore, and I suppose, I don't know, maybe there's actually an image there of the fact that, a child sitting on a cannon might be, or a child climbing on a statue. You have stories of children climbing on works of art. I mean, how it's really about how people use the art. A public artwork might be something that people completely ignore. It might be something that they take for granted. I think with where you have beautiful heritage, where you've got fantastic architecture and historic architecture, and I think it's absolutely true that contemporary interventions can help to bring people in and to animate those places and to keep them alive, and that's really, really good. I think it's very important. I think it can also be very bad if contemporary art is sort of foisted on those places. And I've seen terrible things in Italy where you'll have a beautiful thing like, the Colosseum, some great, ancient site, Pompeii, and then they'll put some terrible sculptures there, which are just like, what the heck? How did they even find this stuff? So it's something that has to be done with subtlety, and also I think on the whole should be temporary. Should not, you don't want to put a big permanent abstract sculpture in the middle of a beautiful old fort. So it's a silly thing to do on the whole. So it's really interesting. Yeah, I mean,
I think just on this idea of heritage, and because also to see public art of today as tomorrow's heritage site, to create new monuments so that we are not adding on to existing beautiful monuments from the past, but creating monuments for the next generations, and this way displacing the perception we have of a certain place, and going back to the disadvantaged areas. Suddenly the idea is that around Paris, in those neighborhoods that are very tough, here is where the public money and investment will create the most important both architecture pieces and public art projects. So I think it's in itself, if you will, a very, very strong message. And the idea behind this, just to give you a couple of images, this will be a way of Ryuji Keda on the right, who is at the Venice Biennale and is being given a chance to create his largest ever permanent installation. And this is a place that's very specific to metro station, that people use every morning, every evening, it's their daily routine.
Yeah.
So that you inject, extraordinary work of art in their daily life.
Looking at what you're showing, it seems that really what you're putting into daily life is beauty.
Mm-hmm.
That these are very beautiful works.
That's the plan.
And that's great, because, and I guess in Paris there's a lot of beauty that's concentrated.
Not everyone
in the
lives by the Louvre. Not
note.
everyone lives on the river, right?
Yeah,
so
exactly, yeah.
Think of the people that are on the outskirts. And that's
so,
them.
I mean, maybe that's the most simple and universal purpose of public art, to beautify everyday life, to beautify people's lives.
I think that's the great conclusion.
Thank you so
which
much.
looks like what you're doing, so great.
Thank you.
Does anybody have any questions for our panelists? I think we have maybe half a second left, but let's try and get one out quickly. No?
I just want to say something. It's not a question to the respected gentleman. I also live in London, and I think it's absolutely beautiful.
Oh, there you go.
Well, compared to Paris, I was comparing it with Paris. I mean, obviously, I love London. It has. I could talk about it. Yeah, it's not. It's a less visually. London's not quite as visually extravagant as Paris or New York or Rome. Yeah, but you get used to it. I got used to it after 15 years or so.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much, and thank you both for joining us in Lahore.
Thank you.